Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce my guest today, Paul Dunn. Paul is a 4-time TEDx speaker. He is a senior fellow in one of the world's leading think tanks and consults to and mentors leading edge businesses around the world. He was also honoured as a social innovation fellow in his new home of Singapore, and it's something that he shares with film star and philanthropist Jet Li and Walmart chairman Rob Walton. He was one of the first 10 people in Hewlett Packard in Australia, and he then created one of Australia's first computer companies and then the Results Corporation, where he helped develop and grow 23,000 small and medium-scale business enterprises. His programs are used by an estimated 226,000 companies around the world, and he continues daily to push the boundaries. He is featured in Forbes Magazine alongside Sir Richard Branson in a global piece on disruptors in business. He is the co-founder of B1G1 Business for Good, the history-making global giving initiative that's already enabled businesses to create over 281 million giving impacts globally. Just let that settle in for a moment. He is also a master storyteller and a mentor to so many people, including me, and an all-round good human. Paul Dunn, welcome to the For Love and Money podcast.
Oh, you've already given me goosebumps through the introduction, particularly the last bit. Carolyn, it's just wonderful to be here with you. Thank you for all you do in this space, and I'm sure the people joining us, by the way, thank you for joining us wherever you are, will feel as good as I do just being here with you. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh my God, it's my great pleasure. And I just want to share with listeners the personal connection I have with Paul. So I am a member, our business, The Cause Effect, is a member of B1G1, which is an incredible organisation. And for those listeners who don't know about it, I can't wait for you to learn about this organisation and the opportunities it gives and the impact that it's creating, the extraordinary impact that it's creating around the world. And Paul was just on our e-newsletter. He was a subscriber to our e-newsletter database, and he's a frequent attendee of my webinars. And I think the first time Paul reached out to me, and I'd met him, I'd heard him speak, I was really inspired by him. But the first time he reached out to me was after one of my early webinars, and he gave me some tips. He said, I hope you don't mind, but can I just give you some tips? And I was absolutely grateful for that, because it was an opportunity for me to get better and to engage people better. And then every now and again, we send out our e-newsletter and I get this little comment back from Paul, comments that really make my heart sing, because it's so wonderful to get feedback on all the work that we're putting out there. So Paul Dunn is an extraordinary human being, and you will get to meet him yourself through this interview. So, Paul, I want to kick off with my first question to you, which is, when you think about purpose in business, what role do you think love has to play in it, if any?
Oh, what a good question right off the bat. And by the way, if you think that Carolyn does things that some people do, which is send me questions so that I get prepared for the answers. No, that's like a beautiful left field question. And let me answer it this way. Someone whom I'm sure you know of is Frederick Reichheld, right? And Fred Reichheld from originally Bain Company, and he is the guy who in 1996 I came across him because he wrote a thing called The Loyalty Effect. And he was the first person to link loyalty with business growth. And then he's also the guy who 20 years ago created Net Promoter Score. And he's got a brand new book, which is called Winning on Purpose. And the whole sense of that, seriously, Carolyn, it's almost like he read your book first, right? Because he basically, well, he doesn't basically say, he says this: anyone who's in business not believing that their purpose of being there is to enrich the lives of the people they serve should not be in business. He's pretty bold about that. Right? So yeah, it is seriously central. And and the most interesting thing about it, of course, is that when you think about love, it's not something that, I mean, yes, you probably feel good about yourself, but when you love, you're automatically going outside yourself. And that's one of the major keys, of course, to being on purpose, to realize that it's not about you. It's just not about you. It's about something bigger than you, and you connecting that to that, and then connecting your customers and your team members to that in, astounding, in our case anyway, some really interesting ways. So the answer to your question, the one-word answer to your question, which is what role does love play? Answer, central.
Yeah. Wonderful. And that's a wonderful story. I love this idea of enriching the lives of the people they serve, and the people they serve being multiple,
Exactly.
Customers,
so.
your employees, your investors, all.
Exactly so.
Wonderful. So, Paul, please share with us your background. You've had an incredibly rich background, but take us on a brief journey of where you started and how you landed as co-founder of B1G1 and where you are today.
Sure. Well, before those of you listening to us right now, and again, thank you for doing it, would recognize that before we actually press record, we say, hello, Karen, we do this thing. And I said to Karen, Karen said something, and I said, well, Karen, actually, I'm actually 28,644 days old today. Now, I realize that if you're driving, you might be inclined to pick up your iPhone and divide that number by 365 and then take off the leap years and figure out, oh my God. But anyway, that's a long time. So let me just shorten it and really try and make some sense of it for you. I think that one of the realities of our life, I think my life has just been incredibly lucky, amazingly lucky. But all of our lives really, really come to this. Where you and I are today is very simple. It's a result of all of the moments that we have experienced, the reaction to those moments. And one of the things that I've been very fortunate to be able to experience is, moments that are kind of, some people would describe them correctly as life-changing. For example, you mentioned earlier on, about the 23,000 businesses, and there's many more, that. And if you'd have asked me way back then, and way back then would be in 2006, for example, if you'd have said to me, so Paul, what's the secret of success in business? I would have said to you, there are two things, just two. So it's very easy, right? Just get these two things right and you'll be successful. And so you would then probably say, well, what are the two things? And I would say, well, point number one is always be sure to be offering just extraordinary value to the people whom you're privileged to serve. It's got to come from that position. And then, okay, I can do that. And then item number two is have fun doing it. And people go, oh, that's pretty simple. And then, so that was my life up to that point. And then I had this moment when it was a moment that had something to do with the army. In 2004, yet I experienced this moment in 2006, about 18 months later. I met this guy. He had been displaced by that, and in fact, he was running a church on an island outside of India. And he told me the story of how they were in the Sunday school, and all of a sudden there's noise, unlike any noise they'd ever heard. And so he said to the kids, there were 12 kids in the room, and he said, it'll be okay. And he opened the door and he looked out to where the noise was coming. And all of a sudden I realized what he was talking about. And I said, oh my God, what did you do? And he said, well, we tried to keep calm. And then I told the kids, why don't we play a game? Let's all hold hands and run up the mountain or the hillside. And he said, I stood there with these 12 kids and we watched as the church was crumbled, and we watched as their parents were washed away as well. And I said, well, I honestly can't remember what I said, but at some point I probably said, what happened then? And he said, well, we've spent the last 18 months, traveling around and trying to find some place for these kids. They've got to get education. And I was introduced to him through a friend of mine, and he said, "Your friend here, his name is Dave. He's been helping us do that." So I said, "Oh, have you figured out?" And I didn't know any of this at that point, right? So I said, "So have you figured out what that cost to do?" He said, "Oh, yes." And I said, "So how much is that?" And he said, "It's $2,500. And I said, "Oh, that's like per child, right?" And he said, no, that's like for all of us. Now, if you'd have been there, any of us listening now, you'd have said, "Okay, I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to fix it," right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't that easy to fix. Getting money to India is not that easy, but I fixed it. And then about 4 weeks later, I get this email from this guy, Pastor Selva. And he's gone down to the local internet cafe, and he's borrowed a camera, and he's taken some pictures, and he sent 4 pictures. The first one is this picture of this place which they now got. They've got this place, and it's a long shot. The next picture is inside the house. It's this, you can't even call it a house. It's the room. And here are the kids in a circle, and they've got their school books open, and he says, "Whoa, they're doing very diligent stuff," all of that. The next shot is the same kids, different position, later time of day, and here they're sitting around again in a circle, but now they've got food and stuff, and it's really important. And then the final shot is a close-up of this home, quote-unquote home. And what they've done is on the outside of the home, they've gotten paper and paint, and they've written "Paul Dunn Home" across the top of it.
Wow.
That is what I would call that is what I would call a moment. And
humbling.
And yeah, and you know how it is, because you do this too. Once you have that, something happens, and somehow or other, the universe conspires to bring other things to your attention which you were not aware of before. It's like you go to the car dealership and you buy a new car or something, and you proudly take it out of the car dealership, and all of a sudden you notice that every third car coming towards you is the same car that you just bought, right? I think it's called the reticular activation system. And so once that happened, all of a sudden I get introduced to amazing people, one of whom is Masami, the original founder of B1G1, and I'm mentoring her. And she's in this mentoring session. She's running a tiny little food company in Australia at the time. And she comes into this session, and it's very clear she's been thinking about some pretty deep things. And she says, "Can we change our session today? Like, can we change what happens?" And I say, and she says this lovely Japanese accent. And I say, "Well, of course you can." And she says, "Well, normally you ask me a question, but I want to ask you a question." So I said, "Okay, well, ask me the question." She said, "Well, I want you to imagine something. Imagine this all happening, by the way, with this beautiful, soft Japanese accent, right?" So I said, "Go ahead." And she said, "Well, I wonder what would the world look like if every time some business was transacted, something great happened in our world." And at the time, Carolyn, you would have described me as an Aussie bloke, right? And so, 2007. And so she says that, and I say, "Wow, that'd be extraordinary." And she was smart enough to realize that was just some sort of smart comment, right? And she says, I don't think you understand yet." I said, "Help me understand." And she said, "Well, in my head, it's called buy one, give one," which of course it no longer is. It's called B1G1 because it doesn't, there's no sort of buy in this thing anyway. So she said, "Well, imagine if you go down," the exact words were, hopefully I can mention this word on your podcast. She said, "If you go down to Harvey Norman and you buy," we should get them to sponsor. So you go to Harvey Norman and you buy a plasma TV, and I go, whoa, what did you say this thing was called? And she said, "Buy one, give one." I said, "Masami, it's crazy. I'm not going to go down there and I'm not going to buy a TV and they're not going to give me another TV. I mean, that's like a crazy model." And she said, no, you really do misunderstand. She said, "You go down there on account of how you want better vision, brighter vision, bigger vision, or whatever in your TV. So how would it be when you did that? if someone who could not see got the gift of sight. My goodness, right? And I'm surrounded by books as I am now. And she said, oh, when, someone gets a book and a tree gets planted, and, I had a cup of coffee in my hand, and she said, or, when someone gets coffee and child in need gets access to water. And I remember saying, can I be your mentor for the rest of your life?
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And so since then, I've had this amazing experience of taking that seemingly simple idea that every time business is being transacted, that something great happens. And it's not, it sounds easy. It's not that easy to do, as you well know. And now, of course, it's like here we are on Zoom, for example, and just because we're on Zoom, 11 kids are getting access to education just because we're on Zoom, right? And so what business is able to do is kind of like embed these amazing things inside their businesses so that everything, happens from a sense of meaning and purpose and contribution, right at the very core of their business. And that transforms everybody in the business. And then when that happens, different connections get made and so on. And because of the work you do, what happens when people really get on purpose. So yeah, there you go. I thought it was a long story, but hopefully one that's memorable and people can relate to.
That is a story worth telling in the detail you've told it. I've heard that story before, and I look forward to hearing it each time.
Really?
I really do, because I think it embodies possibilities. And someone like Masami, who cared enough to actually think that deeply, to think of that idea, and the two of you building it together, and 281 million impacts later. Extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. You mentioned the word possibility. I was reading a very interesting book recently. It's called Teeming, Teeming, and it's written by a lady called Tamsin Woolley Barker. And
can I just stop you for a moment and also just add that this should be in your bio. Paul Dunn is a prolific reader of books. I don't think I have ever known anybody read so many books.
Oh dear, interesting. Anyway, she talks about some interesting things, right? She talks about she studies. She has studied, a specialty was studying incredible organisms, like, for example, termites, like, for example, ants, like, for example, bees, and all of that kind of stuff, and trying to figure out how do the termites know how to build those great big mounds? How do they know how to put the air conditioning on it? How do they run the management structure? How do they do all of that? And then she makes the really wonderful point that maybe we can learn something from that. And here's one of the major learning points. She says we need to understand that with nature, she says, nature does not solve for problems. Nature always looks for potential. And I love that.
Whoa.
I just love that. Isn't that so powerful?
Yes.
So yes. we can see things, and we can see that potential. And the sad, going back to your love comment, let me just talk to the guys, right, who are listening to us now. Guys, here's what happens to us guys. And by the way, women, that this happens. Because you have to sort of, well, you don't have to, but you choose to put up with us sometimes. So what happens is, right, guys kind of lose it, like I've lost my way or whatever it is. And what happens is we disconnect. And I think what happens is we kind of go into a cave. It's called we're in the cave. And we're not going to let anybody in that cave. And we're not going to let anyone come out. We've got to go through this whole thing. And the psychologists perhaps say, well, it's time that you looked inside yourself, right? But no, I'm in the cave. The only thing I am, I've got it inside myself. And all of a sudden you start to realize that sometimes the answer isn't inside yourself, it's outside yourself, right? And so when we can open, and this is where the potential is, when we can open our eyes to just see things out there, and we go, you know what, I could do something about that, in exactly the same way when we see someone, the sort of a typical little old lady that's in the story where, they're walking across the road and they're struggling to get across the road. What are we going to do? We're going to go, oh, can I carry the bag? That's what we're going to do, right?
Yeah.
And we know that's what we do. And we know, and the point about that is that, again, it's not about us, but we know that when we do that, we don't do it because of this. But we know that the little old lady is going to get safely to the other side of the road and they're going to be grateful and they're going to say thank you. And we are going to feel awesome about that, right? So once you get that, you really see, and by the way, those of us running companies, imagine that your team members got this, that every single one of us is at our very best when A, we're thinking about others, and B, when we're giving. And by that, I don't necessarily mean giving money. I don't necessarily mean that. And you would realize, Karen, that just recently in Australia, there's a very important celebration or commemoration went on, which was Anzac Day. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine was at the dawn service, and he told me about it, and he said, Paul, I wish you could have been there. He said there were 10,000 people there, and he said the guy who was doing the sort of religious quote unquote part of the service, he ended his speech that day by saying, if there's one word that I would love you to take away from our time together today, it's this: others. Just hit it in one, and it just, once you do that, it drives so many amazing things in your company. That's why, Karen, that's why you spend so much time talking with, amazing companies that really get that and get on track in so many other ways as a result of doing that.
Yeah, look, and I love this idea of that you've shared. What was the name of the author of Teaming?
Oh, Tamsin. Okay, so Tamsin, 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 Wooley, as in exactly the way you would expect that to be spelled. Yep. Wooley, Wooley.
And we can share. We can. Yeah.
Barker. Yeah. Wooley Barker.
Okay.
Teaming.
And we can share that in the show notes. A link to that. But I love this idea. Nature doesn't solve problems. Nature sees potential.
Isn't that a great idea? It's just a great idea.
Yeah, and I want to think about that a bit more. I want to take it away and sit with it for a bit. But yes, and just looking outside of us. The problem is, Paul, we all know this. We have been living in a society that is all about me. Yeah, and this movement is a movement away from that. It's a recognition. And I think what started as this idea of legacy has evolved, and you've really evolved my thinking on legacy. I remember hearing you speak, and you shared this idea that, legacy, none of us have a choice. We're all going to leave a legacy. So what legacy will we leave? And that's a very, very powerful thought. But for me, the movement that's building starts with legacy, but it's almost like once you start that journey, you get beyond yourself.
Well, yeah, there's several things I think around legacy, and yeah, we do have to realize that we don't have a choice, and so I as you know, I think I love alliterations. The way words kind of way we can, as you do, the way we can make words flow together. And so when I think of companies these days, I think there are two types of companies. There are really standard companies that are doing the standard things that have got us to where we are, right? The standard things that we've always been doing for so long, right? And then there are the stand out companies who are saying, no, we're businesses for good. And so the interesting thing here now is you move right from standard to stand out. Why? Because you stand for. You stand for something that is bigger than yourself. And then you can play with that as well around the legacy thing, because you get the distinction between, yes, you can, it's all about leaving a legacy, and we tend to think about that. But if you play with the alliteration a little bit, you get, okay, well, instead of just thinking about leaving a legacy, why don't we think, in fact, more than think, why don't we live it every single day? And why don't we then leverage it every single day? Just like you're doing now in this podcast, right? We've leveraged this idea that there is something else. There really is something else.
Enjoying the podcast? If you're looking for more inspiration, head to our website, thecauseeffect.com.au, for more resources on how you can start using your business as a force for good. Or buy the For Love and Money book. Every copy sold allows us to protect 1 square metre of rainforest. Help us save 10,000 square metres by 2025.
If you think about it, we think about this thing that we're in now, what's it called, the Great Resignation. I think there's been so many redefinitions of what that means. But I get staggered when people in Australia tell me, "Oh my God, you wouldn't believe what we're having to pay for people these days." And so when that all comes up, it gets very, very interesting in the sense that why is it that right now there are so many people who, and just picking up on your me thing, the me to we, right? Why is it that there are so many people who might be making a lot of money at the end of the day, but you and I know what they do. They put their head on the pillow and they ask themselves the question, is that all there is? Is that all there is? And what you're doing, and you're doing it in spades through your book, what you're doing is saying, well, actually, there's good news. The good news is there is more than that. And when you get that more than that, going back to what I was saying about Fred Reichheld, when we were talking about enriching lives, well, have a guess whose life actually gets enriched because they're enriching lives, right? It just plays back, So yeah, it's a fascinating sequence, and hopefully it's a sequence that we're learning now. We this is pretty urgent stuff that we're dealing with here, and the answer to it. I noticed today there was a piece. I reckon I helped this guy become the author of the year in business books. Right, this is a guy called Tim Duggan, Buggan, and he wrote a book almost about 18 months ago, and it's called Cult Status. And at the beginning of the book, he makes this very interesting point. He says, when we think about building great businesses, what do? Well, we go and we think about wonderful authors like Jim Collins, and we look at good to great and all that kind of stuff. But he said, without taking away from any of that, then we need to understand that most of those companies, in fact, take Apple as a case in point. Apple was created in 1976. That's a long time ago. And so if we are starting businesses today, maybe we need to first acknowledge that it's a different thing. We need to start them differently. And he then gives us 7 things that we can work on. But what I love that he talks about is item number 1 on his list, right? And oh, by the way, we're sort of rapidly approaching, right, end of financial year in Australia now, and people are doing budgets and all of that kind of stuff, and they're projecting, what will the next year be, and everything is sort of like monetary, which I understand we need to do. However, Tim says there's a better way. Tim says, when you're doing all of that, why don't you just define the impact? Just define the impact that you want to have, and define that impact in terms of the number of lives, that you will touch. And when you define that impact and you continually work on that each and every day, have a guess how the people in your team are feeling, right? Oh, it's not the boss just made $1 million. No. We actually impacted, so many lives. And obviously, through B1G1, you can amplify that kind of impact. So yes, there's so many, and you're up there leading the charge on all of this with all the work that you do, great work that you do, and you've got so many examples. By the way, if you've not already got it, I hope you've got Carolyn's newsletter, because it's awesome. If not the book.
Thank you for that plug.
But this stuff, you're sharing things that we look at, like industries that you think, no, there's no way that industry could be on purpose. And you look at what you're talking about, oh my gosh, it works there, right? So
Isn't that incredible, Paul? Like
yeah,
and this is what I love, is there are so many, there's a myriad of different ways that
yeah,
people can create value for society. So going back to, those
yeah,
original 2 points, it stands true. Create
yeah,
value, but create value for society.
yeah, exactly.
Not just for shareholders. But I want to go back.
And increasingly, by the way, there's another thing you can do with the value, right? And another thing you can do with it is put an S on the end of it, right? So that it doesn't become about value, which is obviously really, really important in terms of the value but it's also about the values, which gets back to what
I
is it that you
love
stand
your
for.
way with words. I really love your way with words. Leaving a legacy, living a legacy, and leveraging a legacy, and the standard companies to standout companies to standing for something beautiful. I want to revisit, you talked about the Great Resignation, and in an earlier episode with Nikki Sparshott, the CEO of Unilever Australia and New Zealand, she reframed the Great Resignation as the Great Realization.
Oh,
I thought you'd like that. What I love about that, Paul, is the Great Resignation is the negative, whereas the Great Realization frames it in a positive way
that's so
for businesses, for business leaders to really think, if this is a realization that people are coming to, if it's an awakening, how do we help them find their way? How do we attract the best of them and give them the opportunity to bring their best to the table?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting you raise that because, Paul Pullman, who both of us I know sort of acknowledge, who was the Unilever CEO and now the CEO of Imagine. And I remember in Paul's time, I'm sure it's even better now, and Nikki may have told you this, but I was staggered, absolutely staggered when, because Unilever was like and still is one of the central companies that get this. I mean, they really, really get this. And I remember Paul saying that he said, would you like to guess how many applicants we get for jobs each year? This was 3 years ago. And I said, no, I mean, 100,000, 1.2 million people applying for jobs. And I would suspect that number has increased, since then. So, and again, that just shows you that when you stand out because you stand for, what happens is you kind of turn on this magnet, which instead of you having to sort of push stuff out, look at us, right? It just becomes this magnet, which is just attracting, talent and customers and all of that kind of stuff to you. And it's all because you're standing for purpose, for something bigger than yourself. It's all of a sudden I had this thing pop into my head right there, which is it's like this sort of electromagnet right at the center of everything that you're doing, and it's called purpose.
Yes, absolutely. And that great realization, and the opportunity, the possibilities that it offers to people. I used to talk about how in my long marketing career on the agency side, I used to love what I did. I loved using the skills, creativity, strategy, getting results from clients. And I gave my all to it, but I always had this little voice in my head that was kind of like, do you really want to be selling more soft drink and chocolate and electronics and, that sort of stuff? So it just felt like, like it lacked that purpose, right? And now I've moved, but I, like, my family would tell you that I'm a workaholic. Like, I go all in whatever I do.
Funny thing, I got that about you, yes.
And I thought that I left nothing on the table in my work in the agency world. Today, I don't just love what I do, I'm doing what I love. And therein lies a big difference, because I'm serving something that I'm truly passionate about, that I truly believe in, and that energy that I thought I had before pales into insignificance.
Because with what's happening now, exactly. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah. So it's,
And I had an interesting revelation, revelation, on that today. I got a note from B1G1's accounting people, and they said, Paul, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? And they said, you have got 40 days of leave accrued, which you have to go take.
off you go.
Yeah. But we obviously should, get some rest and all those kind of things. But you're right. When it drives you, it's like, it drives you. End of story. And part of the magic is to be able to, well, it goes back again to leveraging that. So as a company owner, again, Paul Pullman talks about, what does that take? I mean, just from what does it take? And the answer is, first of all, it takes clarity. You really got to get clear. But there's another word that begins with C that it also takes, and that's courage. Because standing for things is not easy. Right? It's not easy. But if ever there was a time when we needed people to stand for, it's no longer about me, it's about we. It's no longer about self, it's about bigger than self. It's no longer about that, it's about values. It's no longer about profit, it's about purpose. It's no longer about income, it's about impact, and all of those sorts of things. That is very, very challenging to stand for. But when you do, I love what you talked about story before. And I love what Steve Jobs said. I got this note from Bernadette Jiwa on the 6th of June last year. It's just changed up some things. And she referenced this quote that Steve Jobs, I shouldn't have told you who said it. I should have had the audience guess. It's Steve Jobs, right? And in 1994, when he was at Pixar, he said this. He said, the storyteller is the most powerful person in the world. Now, ignore the power thing, right? We can ignore the power thing. But then he went on to say this, and this is really the magic. He said, the storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda for an entire generation yet to come. I just want you to think about that for the minute, because you probably think, not you, but the people listening to us, you'd probably think, oh, Paul's about to go and tell us, how do we tell better stories? No, it's not what Paul is about to say. Because you see, even though Mr. Jobs said the storyteller is, the storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda, listen to the next bit, for an entire generation yet to come. Jobs was a great storyteller, but what he really was a great story creator. And he created stuff for us to enable us to tell better stories, which then enable us to change up the stories for the people that we're privileged to serve. So once you get that all of us are in business basically to create a better story. And why would we create that better story? Because it sets the vision, the values, and the agenda for an entire generation yet to come, which means, again, it's not about you. It's not about you. Never was. But hopefully, that's, I'm probably using too many words, but, once you get on this kind of journey, and particularly, having the privilege of talking with you, Carolyn, it's like, oh my goodness, you just want to keep going with the thoughts.
That right there is pure gold. And for me, it's like, and there's so much gold through this interview, but just if people can take that one thought, that one idea, that our job as business leaders, or whoever you are, to use your place, your influence to create stories for an entire generation to come. And, when you think about the context, that idea is powerful alone, but when you think about the context of our present and our future, that takes on a whole new meaning.
Doesn't it just?
Power.
Doesn't it just? It really, really does. Yeah, it really, really does. And what's interesting is, you see, that becomes a very attractive idea for us all. And the reason it becomes attractive is inherently we know that it's not about us. The problem is we act as if it was, right? So the more we know that it's not about us, the more we know that it's, again, setting the agenda, the vision, the values, and the agenda for an entire generation yet to come. In other words, people, just think about that for a minute. People who are not yet here are kind of looking at you. Do you know what I mean? And we have a huge responsibility to change it up. Yeah, we do.
And an opportunity.
Yeah.
And an opportunity.
Or the potential. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's, I think we've got to get beyond this idea of responsibility and think about that we are the generation who have the opportunity to act.
Yeah. And you know what? The interesting thing is, in this book that I was mentioning before, there's a whole lot of stuff, you and I have fun with this, right? But you mentioned, CSR as in corporate social responsibility, and we understand that we have issues with that particular label. There's another interesting label, right? The other one that's being used very, very frequently these days, which is ESG, got ESG investment and all of that kind of stuff. And for those of you who haven't heard it, if there's anyone on the planet who hasn't heard it, it stands for environment, society, and governance, right? And so what happens is the accountants figure, oh my gosh, we got to account for this, and we got to create new accounting schemes and all of that kind of stuff, right? And it gets very complex, and we're never going to find the answer to it. We never are, because we just are not. So there's all this stuff going on. And by the way, I work with a lot of accountants, and they understand that they do good things, right? They really do. But I reckon if you think next time you see the words ESG, just don't go with the typical thing. Oh yeah, I know what that means. Economic, social governance. Just get a new definition for it. What it means is embed social good. That's what it means.
Oh, beautiful.
And if you can just embed social good right in the fabric of what you do, guess what? Mission accomplished.
Wonderful. And that's a great intro into B1G1. I could talk to you generally about this subject forever, but I want listeners who might not know about B1G1 to understand what this organization is about, and not just to be able to understand it. I don't know if you can share some stories, Paul, so that they can understand it from an individual perspective, but also the collective impact of the movement that you're creating.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's this whole task is a bit big to do one off, right? Or one, just you. And so the opportunity, for example, you and I sharing right now, and all of that is really critically important. But B1G1, I mean, it is that simple idea. It is that simple idea. And there's a number of ways that I could say it. I could say, that I get up every morning to help businesses create more impact in their business and on our world than they ever imagined. I could say it that way. I could say, just imagine being a part of something where the very fabric of that business, where for example, where you're having a meeting, and as a result of the meeting, people say that was a good meeting, and that meeting is linked to doing, some great thing in the world. Oh, look at that! Just because of us having that meeting, so many people got access to life-saving water, or so many women got microloans so they could do wonderful things in their communities. And again, B1G1, has this. All of these, as you know, this very wide spectrum of things that you can do. All of them, thank goodness, literally, thank goodness, linked to the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals, and so it just gives us, we can count all of that, and you can display it on your websites and all of that sort of thing that you can choose to do. But the reason for coming to it is not because it looks pretty on your website, which, by the way, it does. I mean, mind-blowing, but is your intent. And your intent is very clear. And that intent is that, what Karen and I have really been speaking about, that it's just not about you anymore. It never was but it is all about, something bigger than yourself. And what Carolyn does, and she helps you find that. She will help you find that. How do I find my why? Quick answer to the question. Talk with Carolyn. She's got a great way.
I'm not paying him for this.
No, you're not. No, that's true. But and there are processes that it's possible to go for. So you can get it and just go, wow. For some people, and that some people say this, but for the first time in my life, I have that clarity as to why I'm here. And when you get that clarity as to why you're here, everything changes, not just for you, but for the people with whom you interact each day.
Thank you, Paul. I want to share my story with B1G1. And that was when I started the Cause Effect, and I pivoted away from the agency, and I started from scratch, zero revenue coming in. I wasn't quite sure what I was starting. And I came across B1G1, and what drew me to it immediately, obviously, was the impact. But what allowed me, or what invited me to immediately become a member, was the fact that I could start creating impact for as little as, I think it's 1 cent or 2
1 cent, yeah.
Yeah?
It's crazy.
Okay. And to me, with a startup with zero revenue, I couldn't say no to that. For me, it was like, I can do that. When I meet with someone, I can create an impact, $1 or whatever it might be. And the effect of that in terms of, how it motivated me in creating more meetings, and also by sharing that in a very beautiful way, which B1G1, they give you suggestions on how you might do that.
How you do it.
In just such a gentle, lovely way. I cannot tell you the profound impact that created on people I met with. So, B1G1 it's impossible to say no to. If you're listening to this and you work in a company and, personally you care about purpose and impact and you want to create some, you can start with yourself, with your team, in small ways. And what you will find, I guarantee it, is the ripple of effect of that grows. And it's an extraordinarily easy way to start creating incredible impact and surrounding yourself with a community of like-minded people.
Well, I'm not sure what it was like for the people listening to that, but I can tell you that just gave me goosebumps. So to hear that story, because so often we work in this mode, don't we? Where someday I'll when I get successful and all of that kind of stuff. And now hopefully just through that little story that you told, people are going to say, well, actually, no. All of a sudden I get it. What I get is that it's part of the journey. It's not this destination.
It's not an afterthought.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly so.
And that's the beauty of it. It's not a when I do, when I make this money, then I will. It's embedding it at the very core, and that it's a beautiful thing that you and Masami Sato have created.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to wrap up because I've held you for a while here, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this question.
What a ball! Yeah,
but I'd like to ask you a final question, Paul.
Sure.
So obviously, we're doing this interview in 2022, 8 years away from 2030, which is the target date for the UN Global Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, which I know you are very, very passionate about. Business clearly needs to be an active part of the solution and has a real opportunity in doing that. Yet I believe through my interactions, there are some business leaders who are still unsure about how far to lean into social purpose. They know they've got to do something, but Is it just something, is it still on the side? How far do I lean into it? I want to ask you, Paul, if you could share one thing to convince them that this is their moment and they need to lean in strongly. This is where they need clarity and courage, which you talked about before.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to them?
Well, my advice would come in the form of this is the moment, right? It is. Often when we ask questions are kind of interesting things, and that you don't need the answer to create the future. You just need the question, right? And there's a brilliant question at the beginning of Paul Polman's Net Positive book. But there's a very interesting question. The question is this. Oh, actually, do this. Imagine, I've never said this before. Imagine going home tonight and your 12-year-old daughter, who will be 20 in 2030, right, says to you, "Hi, Mommy. Hi, Daddy. I've got a question for you." "Certainly, darling. What's the question?" And by the way, rest assured that kids get this better than we adults do. Rest assured of that. Child says, "Oh, I saw this question in this book. Can I ask you the question?" "Sure." Here comes the question. Imagine your 12-year-old asking you this question. Is our world better off because your business is in it? That's the question. I mean, and what Carolyn does, what I do, and there's so many other, lots of people around the world, is we want every single one of you who's listened to this to be able to answer with like an exclamation mark, with a punch fist kind of thing, right? Not that you should go punching fists, but with a very resounding yes. Yes, it is.
Wonderful. Thank you. I couldn't have asked you to share a better piece of advice than that. Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you for sharing your time to talk to me on this interview. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope our listeners get the value from this that I know they can. So really appreciate you.
And I want you to know that whenever you do things, people get enormous value from what you do. And so thank you for letting me be a part of that. It's just been awesome to be able to be in an environment where it's okay to express very important feelings to those people who were listening. So not just thank you for listening as well. And let's hope you can answer yes to that question as well.
Wonderful.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?